going to explain something very important. Mindfulness is a fad. Specifically, I'm talking about mindfulness as it is taught in Western societies. Now, the point I'm making here is going to be very important in terms of the psychology of awakening. And if you can take away the point I'm making, it's going to make a substantial impact in terms of how you understand your own attention and apply it towards realizing ultimate reality. Now, the trend that we see in Western societies, science especially, is that we reduce information. We find something that works, we try to boil it down to its essence, and then we take those mechanisms and understand those to draw conclusions about the whole. We call this reductionism. We've seen the same trend with a lot of different psychological topics. And that's where mindfulness has come, especially within the last 10, 15 years. It's become much more popular. Now, mindfulness, as we commonly know it, it's defined by Jon Kabat-Zinn, perhaps best. It's the awareness that we get from applying our attention to the present moment non-judgmentally. As you can imagine, in science, when we try to operationally define things, that is a very slippery definition. It's not exactly clear what that means. And unfortunately, I've been a victim of this myself as a therapist. We teach mindfulness as a stress management technique. This is the part where mindfulness is really a fad because we are taking a contextual whole, super important parts of why mindfulness is important and stripping those away and just selling out mindfulness as a stress reduction technique. Now, if that's all you want out of mindfulness, sure, that can help you. However, what you will find is that after a little while, people will use mindfulness as a stress reduction technique. They might practice 5 minutes a day, perhaps even 1 minute a day. Unfortunately, in therapy, it might be more like 5 minutes a week. And then they suddenly expect, all right, I've got this mindfulness thing down. Once I'm stressed out, I'm just going to sit there and be mindful for 5 minutes and everything will be good. And the unfortunate part is that it actually does work in that short period of time. Temporarily, you are diverting your attention from whatever's stressing you, and it does help you in that moment. Now, the biggest problem with the way mindfulness is packaged in terms of a stress reduction technique is that it misses out on for why mindfulness is important in the first place. What I mean by this is that mindfulness is actually an emergent property when your attention is properly trained. Now, this is something that's very rare in psychotherapy, Western society, where our attention is narrow but highly focused. We kind of need the opposite to really reap the benefits of trained attention. When your attention is properly trained, which, by the way, involves an entirely different set of psychological functions that are associated with the right hemisphere as opposed to the left hemisphere. I will make videos about that later. What you see is that your attention becomes much broader, more contextualized, and mindfulness is an emergent property. It's not something you have to keep training every 5 minutes as a distress tolerance technique. It becomes something that's automatic because your attention has already been trained. And this is the most important part, which is I really haven't seen it mentioned much at all, and it really should be. The whole point of mindfulness is to apply awareness towards things that you are attending to in the present moment. That part we know, but the part that needs to be added on is that we are realizing ultimate reality at every given moment in everything, because all things are not separate from ultimate reality. When your attention is properly trained, you can realize this truth at any given moment through mindfulness, which is now an emergent automatic property. And then you realize ultimate reality through all things. And from that point, what you see is that there is a degree of diffusion, as we would call it in the psychological flexibility model, which separates this degree of attachment to reality as we think we know it to the ultimate reality that we actually are. When you have this separation, it gives you a very high level of freedom from psychological suffering because you can see how there are causes and conditions that lead to psychological suffering that are not present or are uprooted when you fully realize ultimate reality and can maintain that realization through mindfulness and properly trained attention. So, in short, the conclusion here is that mindfulness is similar to what's done with medicine in Western society, but it doesn't really translate as well to psychological sciences. When you have a type of herbal medicine, for example, Eastern societies will often look at that contextually, right? They'll take the whole, this is the plant, this is the leaf, this is the compound, and then all of that comes together as a medicine. Western society is more interested in what is the core active ingredient that works and how can we turn that into a medicine to help with this specific problem and specific cause. When that's done with psychological aspects, however, if you tell someone to just stop being anxious, for example, it's not going to work. And the reason for that is because psychological functions are much more contextual. I know I'm using that word a lot, but it's really important. You can't separate psychological functions in terms of one function versus another. They all come in a package and they're all interrelated. So when you properly understand this and you actually find ways to properly train your attention, which is something I will also cover in this channel, you don't even have to train mindfulness. It becomes an emergent property that always stays with you. That is the more important part for mental health. It's more work up front, absolutely, but once you get there, it becomes an automatic and self-sustaining way for alleviating mental health problems.